Hello, my name is Garrett and I'm a service engineer with Timken. Today we're going to discuss how to properly install a Timken SAF housed unit with a pull-type tapered adapter sleeve. First, we're going to cover the tools and personal protective equipment, or PPE, necessary to safely and properly do the job. You will need a feeler gauge, a spanner wrench, a small punch and hammer, and a ratchet and socket. Your PPE should include steel-toed boots, safety glasses, and a pair of gloves. Make sure your gloves are clean so minimal contamination finds its way into the bearing, and always follow the standard safety practices established by your employer. Now, before installing the SAF, we need to determine the bench and mounted radial internal clearance ranges. For the remainder of the video, we will refer to radial internal clearance as RIC. To determine RIC ranges, first we need to find the SRB part number. The part number of this bearing is 22216KEJW33C3. The last two digits of the base part number are 16. Multiplied by 5, this gives us a bore size of 80 millimeters. Also note the clearance designation, which is C3. Now we'll refer to the Timken Tapered Bore SRB mounting card, which you can get from your Timken sales or service engineer or on timken.com. This bearing has a bore size of 80 millimeters and a C3 clearance designation. Comparing these numbers with the mounting card, the bench RIC range is 0.0037 to 0.0047 inches. Next note the recommended reduction of RIC, which is 0.0015 to 0.002 inches. Lastly, note the minimum permissible RIC after installation, which is 0.0017 inches. Before we measure the bench RIC, we need to oscillate the inner ring of the bearing to properly orient the rollers. Measure the bench RIC with the feeler gauge. Check each side and record the average. RIC should be measured between the rollers and the outer race. On the bench, this clearance is located at the top, which is why we measure the bench RIC from the 12 o'clock position. This bearing has a clearance of 0.004 inches. Now that we've measured the bench RIC, calculate the mounted RIC range, which is determined by subtracting the recommended reductions from the bench RIC. This gives us a mounted RIC range of 0.002 to 0.0025 inches. If the lower end is lower than the minimum permissible RIC, the minimum permissible RIC should replace the lower end of the mounted RIC range. Now we're ready to install the bearing. First, inspect the shaft for size, form, and any high spots. This shaft has been pre-checked and we're ready to start installing. Next, install the inboard aluminum seal ring, as well as the tapered adapter sleeve with the threaded side out. Place the tapered adapter sleeve at the approximate bearing center line. Then slide the bearing up the tapered adapter sleeve. Verify the position is still correct. Once verified, install the lock washer, tangs out, and the lock nut with a large chamfer facing in. Drive the bearing up the sleeve by tightening the lock nut. Periodically check the mounted RIC as you drive the nut up. When the bearing is hanging on the shaft, the clearance is at the bottom. This is why the mounted RIC is typically measured at the 6 o'clock position. Our range is 0.002 to 0.0025 inches, so we're going to shoot for 0.0025 inches. The mounted RIC measured at 0.0025 inches, which means we've achieved the proper fit. Next, peen over one of the lock washer tangs into an open slot on the lock nut. If an open slot is not available, advance the lock nut to the next open position. Next, slide the outboard seal ring onto the shaft. Pull the housing base up to the bearing end seals. Carefully guide the seal rings into the housing grooves. Now it's time to install or scrap the stabilizing ring. If this is the fixed position, install the stabilizing ring. If this is the float position, scrap it so that it is not accidentally installed. We are going to assume that this is a fixed position, so we will install the ring. Now install the housing cap. It is important to note that caps and bases are not interchangeable with other SAF housed units and should be considered matched pairs. Finally, it's time to tighten down the bolts, connecting the cap to the base. And that's how to successfully install a Timken SAF housed unit with a tapered adapter sleeve. I hope this information proves useful on your job site. Thanks for watching.